Welcome to the Present Fathers Podcast. This is the show that focuses on climbing the mountain of fatherhood together. We believe that dads matter. That's why this show is for you. So gear up, dads. Get ready. It's time to start climbing. Welcome to another episode of the Present Fathers Podcast. Our guest today is Jonathan Rios. Jonathan is a husband, a father of four, an outdoorsman, and a licensed psychotherapist. He's also the author of the book Primal Virtues for the Modern Man, and he runs a course for men to build fierce and competitive men. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, man, and looking forward to learning from all you've done. So if you could start, give us a little bit about your background, talk about your family, how you got to where you are professionally, and we'll just take it from there.
Right on, man. Yeah. Born in Puerto Rico, grew up with three sisters. I'm the oldest of four, but generally speaking, spent lots of time in masculine tribes growing up, played high-level soccer there at my youth, and then played Division I for 4 years, then trained at VMI, which is a military academy with the Army, for 4 years, then played overseas for 2 years in Ireland, again, another tribe of men, and have always that was up through the age of about 27. So got married at the age of 29. My wife and I decided to produce 4 daughters, which was awesome. Went for the boys, never happened. I think it's because I drank so much Mountain Dew in college. That's just a theory. So yeah, man, once I stopped playing soccer and started getting, started to become a family guy, really started to really rethink what it was to be a father, a husband, and decided to go back to school for my undergrad's in psychology, and decided to finally go back to school to study counseling psychology. Ended up doing that, now licensed in the state of Florida, and cut my teeth here in South Florida, which is heavy with addiction treatment. So spent 15 to almost 19 years working in addiction treatment centers and dealing with all kinds of addictions, and fell in love with that population, could relate to that population. I've had my own struggles in the past with binge drinking and hard drugs. And my grandfather was a heroin addict. He actually died of AIDS. He contracted HIV through needles. And so it's in my family lineage. And just through the process of working in that population, you get exposed to trauma, anxiety, depression, you name it, man. Everything under the sun, personality disorders. And eventually, of course, I decided to launch my own practice, wanted to work for myself, and really began to clamp down and focus on anxiety disorders, and particularly panic disorders and phobias. And I'm also very passionate about working with athletes or performers who are trying to go to the next level. Maybe it's a high school kid who's really competitive and he wants to go Division I, or maybe it's a amateur baseball player who wants to go play in the MLB. And then in Florida, we have a lot of golfers, so I see a lot of golfers as well. And again, through the process of working with different clientele, really started to just organically have a hunger to teach men what it is to be a man in the modern era. Specifically because I started seeing so many men who hadn't been fathered, and you guys are well aware of the statistics there. But yeah, so I guess that was the natural progression. It's, man, there's this gaping lack of knowledge and lack of fathering, lack of apprenticeship, lack of mentorship. And I've been blessed, man. My father's still alive. He's mentored me my whole life. We're still tight. We have a good relationship. He's the guy I call when I have issues. I've had other mentors, and a lot of men have just never had anything like that. So I had a sense of obligation to, teach what I'd freely been given. So that's informed even some of the programs I've launched. I've got a 3-day intensive, which is called the Primal course in North Carolina, which is a mixture of psychotherapy meets rugged mountaineering, meets basic survival skills, meets competition and brotherhood, and and teaching of mental toughness and confidence and stages of masculine development. It's a mixed bag, man, because I didn't want to teach anything that would be boring. I wouldn't want to. I wanted to create something that I would want to go to. So that's how that happened. And then I also have an 8-week rite of passage men's group, which is attended. I'd say 50% of my participants are local Palm Beach County Floridians. The other 50% are from all over the country. And we go through the different facets of what it might need to look like in order to operate at max capacity as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a business owner. We explore identity, sexuality, marriage, masculine development, confidence, courage, things like that. And it culminates in a 24-hour nonstop crucible event, which is a mixture of paramilitary style training / hand-to-hand combat and competition. And so, I'm on the coast, man. So a lot of it takes place in the water or on the coastline, and it's a really epic time. It really bonds the man at the end of the 8-week stage, and throughout they've been building up. Well, there's physical disciplines, and we're all intermittent fasting the whole 8 weeks, and so there's a lot that goes into that. But I'm really passionate about it, man, and it was born out of necessity, bro. Like I saw a need, and I spent 4 years training at VMI and was mentored by, men of great renown, warriors, staff sergeants, lieutenants, generals, man. They're all these badass warriors, and just wondered what that could look like to take some of that stuff, mix it with some of the psychological training I've received. And then all that is infused with the fact that I'm a Christian. I believe that we are image bearers, and God meant something when he designed men. So in a nutshell, that's what keeps me busy.
I love it, man. I love your passion, and also the, just taking action. You saw a need and decided to do something about it. So I guess my first question to you then is, so much of this is based off of masculinity, teaching men to be men. So according to Jonathan Rios, what is a man? What defines a man? Not from a biological point of view, but when does a boy become a man?
Yeah.
Got to clarify that in these times you live in,
Yeah, I am well aware. Yes. So, man, two things that come to mind. Number one, Eric Gilmore, he said it this way. He said, masculinity or manhood is the eradication of childhood narcissism. So the Bible says it this way: when I became a man, I put away my childish ways. Right. So there's a pivot. And if you think of it in terms of, okay, what do boys do? Boys, well, they tend to play. They kind of live in fantasy land, right? They're sword fighting with sticks, and they haven't yet developed a hunger for responsibility. In fact, they run from it. Go clean your room, Johnny. Johnny doesn't want to clean his room, right? Because he wants to play and never grow up. Peter Pan syndrome. So, yeah, and there's a stage for that. There's a season for that, to be the boy. But at some point, we've got to make that shift. And the shift is to gladly accept sacrificial responsibility, right? So we're making this pivot point and shifting into, all right, a man takes responsibility for standing on his own 2 feet, for becoming a protector, for becoming a provider. He starts to tend to the garden, so to speak. He starts to become a caretaker, right? So that the garden can flourish. And the garden might be metaphoric for his domain, whether that's a wife, or that's his job, or that's his apartment, or that's his village, his city, whatever it is, even his own temple, his own body. He starts to become the true blue caretaker. So in my opinion, that's when we start to move into what it means to be a man, and at a very base level, right? So that doesn't factor in temperament, that doesn't factor in personality, that doesn't factor in upbringing. And men look different, but at a base level, is he gladly accepting sacrificial responsibility is he leaving behind boyhood fantasy? Doesn't mean you can't be childlike, right? We don't want to, we grow old because we stop playing. I'm not saying we stop playing. I'm saying we mature, right? So that's my base answer.
I like that. It's a pretty good, clear way to define it. And I've believe that there's a issue now with essentially physically grown men are still in a prolonged state of adolescence, emotionally and maybe spiritually.
100%.
Do you have any idea, just working with all these different guys, what do you think is causing that? Is it literally just fatherlessness? Is it a bigger issue? What can we do collectively in all of our different communities to stop that?
Correct me if I'm wrong, George. The question is, what is it? Why is it that men really are kind of stuck in that adolescent stage, that adolescent mindset?
Because I think like if our grandfathers and great grandfathers would be like absolutely baffled by this, right? I mean, their generation just kind of took things over, right? There wasn't really there was no concept of prolonged adolescence for a 30-year-old man or something, you know what I mean? But today you have how many, grown men in their 30s, late 20s, 30s still live at home, or, they don't, all that kind of stuff that you hear about.
Yes.
Why is that?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. So, okay. Yeah. So of course, I mean, fatherlessness is a real issue, but the issue with fatherlessness, or one of the issues, is if I've never had someone to show me the way, then I'm just kind of stabbing at the dark, trying to just figure it out, right? And so I think, well, it's not a thought. It's actually, if you just look at cultural history, for all of human history, rites of passage were the norm in society, right? We're the new guys, right? To where we don't even know what that, it's just a fancy name. We don't even know what that means anymore. It's been lost. So what a rite of passage was, and what it does, is it teaches the boy how to become a man. It takes him through a process, a permeating process, where he starts to learn, okay, a boy does this and a man does this. This is what it looks like to be a leader. This is what it looks like to be someone who finishes what he starts. This is what it looks like to step into the fray. And in a rite of passage, you're learning you have what it takes. You're learning that you are the apple of your father's eye. You're learning that you're learning what honor is. Like, what does honor look like among men? How to treat women, how to work ethic, all these things come into play. You're actually learning hard skills, right? It's like, it's a form of apprenticeship. How are you going to know how to do that stuff unless someone who's gone before you shows you the way? And there's an old, I forget the exact verse, but there's an old verse in Jeremiah. It says, ask for the ancient paths, that you may essentially know the way and walk in it. And so there's this ancient knowledge. Here's what it is to be a man and a father, and I will show you how. I'll teach you, and you can also mimic me. I'll demonstrate, and then you try it. And then we'll tweak it, and you try again, and use different iterations. And so when the word apprenticeship would be a great way of thinking of it. So I think that's one of the main reasons we see extended adolescence is, I mean, just so you guys know, I don't know if you knew this, my wife and I fostered 13 teenage boys over the course of some years, and from the ages of 11 up through 18. And so, it was just like hands-on, in my face, hands-on reality. Okay, these kids don't know how to do anything. They've been neglected, abandoned, abused. No one had ever fathered them. Heck, their perspective of male authority figures was all skewed and messed up. And so, that's one of our roles, man, as healthy, mature men, is to teach the younger generations. Man, even honestly, doesn't necessarily need to be the younger generation, guys that are older than you who just weren't taught things and fathered. There's no shame there but we do need a bit of a wake up call to go, hey, like there's more for you. You've got more in the tank. Here's how you do it.
Yeah. And what you were alluding to there was a little bit like from the book Wild at Heart by John Eldridge, where he talks about, there's like the stages of manhood. And if you get stuck at one, you can't really ever grow to the other ones. And yeah, so to your point, older men could potentially still be stuck at like step 1 or 2, and a younger guy who had great fathering and had that drawn out of him from a younger age in terms of how many years he's walked the earth. But within him, he may be a lot more man, actually. So it's interesting how that can play out. I know Justin had a question for you. I'll kick it over to him.
It wasn't just a question. It was just kind of to piggyback off something he said. It kind of struck home a little. I think, him saying that, fathers create the path forward. That's a very profound statement. Like, that's not something that a lot of people just visualize and see, but that's exactly what a father or a mentor does. And it doesn't have to be a father, it could be a father figure. But I'd say, for me personally, like, I had some maturity issues due to some traumas that happened in my life. I went through some pretty hard times in the last decade or so, and it stopped me in my tracks. And I really struggled with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
But having a strong father who had been through similar like events, and I'll just tell you what the event was. It was a divorce. He kind of guided the way for me. I mean, even though he didn't say or really do anything specific, it was, I've taught you this way. This is how I live my life. I've taught you to be able to take these hardships and react to them the way that I would react. And so he kind of guided me without even guiding me, if that makes sense. He kind of showed me the way. He kind of gave me a path forward, or a blueprint, so to speak. And I think that's what a lot of kids, I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of kids are missing that structure and that path forward. And I think that's why a lot of guys need to mentor more. And I have to say, like, when you said seasons, it really clicked with me, because that was a season of my life. I couldn't figure anything out for myself other than the wisdom that was shared with me from other men. So, and then of course I had George, who was already a father at the time. I was not. I'm a fresh father in this one. But it's just like having those brothers and fathers and those mentor figures in your life really can change and pull you away from, those immaturities and pull you towards growth. And like George has said countless times, and we've all said on this podcast, like, accountability with a brotherhood, or like you said, a tribe, is definitely something that I think we all need. We're all guilty of those seasons, so to speak. But having a father figure, I think, is the strongest, I guess, tool to have on your belt for that. So,
yeah, man, I love it.
And Jonathan, right away, you were talking about the program where, it culminates after the 8 weeks with the kind of challenging event. I think that really illustrates very well just how, as men, boys or men, actually, there's something in us, just deep within the way we're created, that we like, that shared suffering just creates a level of bond that you don't really get otherwise. But I also think we deep down desire that, right? Like, we don't want to go through the pain in the forefront, but in the long run, we're like, man, I'm so glad I did that with my brothers, So I think that's very wise that your program puts such an emphasis on tribe. But from my point of view, it just seems like, with social media, and we live in the digital age and all this kind of thing, people aren't connected anymore. Not even just men. It's just in general. Like, no one talks to their neighbors. We're all isolated in our little bubbles. And I'm trying to think, you probably have more exposure, having, raised foster kids and working with guys of all ages, I assume. How is that impact of not having tribe? What are younger guys struggling with? What can we open our eyes to help, if we're a little bit older now, to reach out and maybe make a difference? Is it not just volunteer work necessarily, but just having that eye in our communities to kind of to take the initiative, I guess?
Yeah, well, okay, so a lighthouse draws boats and humans to it just by its nature, right? So I think by every listener, by you guys, by me, maxing out potential and stewarding your talents, your ideas, your dreams, your visions, your giftings, as you begin to expand, that's attractive, right? And so then it's, I think, on an individual basis, looking around you, going, I try to coach people, like, what bothers you? You know, for some people, it's abortion, and to a certain level, it bothers all of us. But for some people, it's foster kids. For some people, it's how do we teach? Let's teach other men how to be fathers, right? For some people, it's, man, I'm really passionate about helping entrepreneurs max out their business. Whatever bothers you, it's like a holy indignation, a holy irritation. You should pay attention to that, right? So that's part of it. I had some of that. My wife had some of that with the foster thing, right? So, but that was for a season. We were still in the process of having our own kids. We've got 4 daughters. So that's what I would say. Pay attention to what bothers you. Also notice where you see a need, and it kind of frustrates you that hole is not plugged, right? So maybe that's a sign to you that you're supposed to step in that direction. But I would caution, man, like, it's kind of preached on social media and on YouTube, like that you should give a shit about everything. And the truth is, if you give a shit about everything, if you care about everything, you'll care about nothing, because you'll be spread too thin. So you have to kind of narrow down, okay, God, is this you? Are you on this? Is this what's in my heart? And like nagging thoughts, nagging ideas, nagging burdens inside of you. Pay attention to those things. Hopefully that answers a little bit of your question.
No, that's a very good way to look at it in terms of like the lighthouse, right? Drawing the attention in the first place. And I agree with you. You have to be very guarded in terms of your own time, because if you can't only focus on outward, right? We all have families here. That's your first ministry. That's your first responsibility, is to your family.
Be a life suck too, man. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and even if too much of a good thing, you know, if you're pouring yourself, we had a guest recently, Cody Jefferson, talked about this. You know, he spent his entire life pastoring and worship leading, and everything was about the church, and everything was about helping people. And he was helping other people so much, he literally just like forsake his own family. You know, and obviously has a lot of regret about it and learned from it. But, you know, that's just one example of what I think you're talking about, where you need to get engaged in something that matters, but you need to also not spread yourself too thin, because it's very easy, right? With all the awareness, social media is a double-edged sword, right? You can get connected to all these, you know, organizations and great ways to help, but then if you sign up for 10 of them, you've got no time for yourself left. So
It's
Justin, go ahead.
It's that plus like something to consider. Okay, so if I was your enemy, one of my main goals would be to distract you. I mean, I think Sun Tzu said something to the effect of the thing you'd want to do in battle is to distract your enemy from the actual thing.
Subterfuge,
right?
Yep.
Right. So it's diversion. And we live in an era of massive technology, and there's a news story in front of you every 30 seconds, and you could pay attention to so many things. You give yourself to the many while you neglect the things that matter, right? So I think each one of you has unique callings and unique anointings for particular things. And so it's just really kind of slowing down and noticing, okay, although this is a good thing, this over here is the thing I'm supposed to give my energy to. And that also applies to mentorship. You're not supposed to mentor everybody, right? You can't. You can create content and do your best, but you know, like I said, if you spread yourself everywhere, you've got no quality in a particular niche area. So we have to be really careful with that, man. I see a lot of guys that have such a big heart that want to mentor all the fathers, and it's like, no. Even Jesus basically discipled those who ran after him and were hungry. I mean, the invitation was open. But, he would often do things like, hey, man, hey, guys, eat my flesh, drink my blood. And then that would thin the crowd. He's like, oh, you still around? You still going to walk with me? Okay, cool. You 12 are still around? Cool. Let's do this.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for that, another tool of it is to discern what's God's voice in your life and his will and what your own voice is. Because we can, if we're not using the Bible or the word as the base model for hearing his voice, we're not going to know if it's his or ours. And we're going to say, we got to do this, we got to do this. And I feel called to do this and this and this. And like you said, we spread ourselves thin and we degrade what God is intending for our lives. So I think discerning his voice is going to be one of the most particular things in the battle of that. So
absolutely. 100%.
Justin, I think you had a question too, right?
Yeah, so I was just going to ask, fostering that many kids, what would you say was the biggest missing puzzle piece for them, like from fatherhood, or something that from fatherhood that helped them the most? If you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
for most of these guys, they needed a combination of a man who could be consistent, who was gracious but firm, and who wouldn't fold under pressure or under intimidation and would follow through with his word. So I'll give you an example. Like I had one guy, we'll call him Franklin. Franklin came from all these guys were abused, neglected, abandoned. A lot of them had been sexually traumatized, stuff like that, sleeping on the streets. And this kid comes in and he would steal steal food out of the fridge at night, and then I'd find chicken bones under his bed. Right. So I'm like, yo, hey Franklin, what's up with this? And he was so used to having to scrap for food that this was his way of ensuring he could eat. So I had to be consistent and go, hey man, there's always going to be food for you here. You don't need to steal. If you're hungry, just go eat in the kitchen. Just don't leave chicken bones under the bed. Right. So that was one thing, but also this particular kid, because he was used to volatile authority figures who were physically violent with him and who would raise their voice. So if I would go into the room and ask him to clean his room or make his bed, he would bow up on me like ready to fight. And I would look, man, like I would have to come in firm but kind and be careful with my tone. I had to show him I'm not a threat to you. I'm here to protect you. And I would just try to keep order in the house. And one of the things I would do is when the guys first move in, I would work out with them in the garage, because that was a big ethic of ours is, hey, if you want half an hour of game time, if you want to play Xbox, you work out for half an hour. So that getting them active. But I would work out with them. I would teach them some boxing, some basic jiu-jitsu. That way they could feel me, but it was in a controlled environment. And I was teaching them, here's how you defend yourself. We're in control here. And so the boys knew the difference between unbridled violence and self-controlled harnessed aggression. And so that was one of the things I felt was very needed. So the consistency, the follow through, if you cuss at me or get hostile with me, I don't take it personally and we could figure it out. But no one would ever punch me or try to take me on, because I would show them in a controlled setting, I will submit you with grace without hurting you if you try. We don't get violent in this house, right? There's a controlled measure to it. So those are a couple of things that I used to practice that I felt worked fairly decent. It's not an exact science. I mean, everybody's got different temperaments, but I found that helpful.
Right. And it's so hard for kids, especially kids that weren't, to understand that there are such things as healthy boundaries instead of just all these unhealthy ones. And I think that's what a lot of kids struggle, is just they're so used to the unhealthy boundaries and the lack of emotional intelligence, and they're always on the defensive. So when you get them to let their guard down and realize everything's okay. It's like, wow. And so it's pretty exciting to see. And speaking of something exciting, I want to talk about your journey into psychotherapy and why you chose specifically to focus on anxiety and panic and relationship issues. Can you tell us a little bit more on that?
Yeah. Well, to be human, you got to deal with relationship issues, right? So naturally, people don't typically come to therapy because they had a glorious insight in their journal. I mean, there's a couple people, but generally it's because they hit pain. Their relationships are going south, or
Right.
they can't get a date, or you can't hold down a job or whatever. So that's part of it. But specifically with anxiety disorders, it really comes down to the fact that I've always been really passionate about being courageous, being bold, and facing your fears. And anxiety and fear are like stepsisters. So, phobias, there's so many different types of phobias, but what phobias end up doing is they cause people to play small and live small. Right. So, I started working with clients to help them face their fears, whether it was the fear of public speaking, because I had a severe fear of public speaking. In fact, I dropped out of public speaking class in college for 3 semesters in a row. I mean, I was terrified. I was terrified. I had to do hand-to-hand combat and boxing and wrestling. Terrified. I'd never done anything like. I played soccer, and I was aggressive on the field, but that's not the same thing as getting punched in the face. Right?
A little different.
A little different. So, I was consistently working on facing my own stuff, and had a serious rock climbing accident and developed a serious fear of heights. Had to work through that. So I just figured, hey, I'll take my clinical knowledge and my personal experience and start helping people. And after a bad car accident, I developed really bad panic attacks and had to work through that. And so I just figured, well, hey, I'll just teach people how to break out of panic disorder and panic attacks. And so that kind of spun off. And then, I work with athletes and performers, whether they're public speakers or podcasters or whatever, CEOs, they have to perform. And with performance, oftentimes comes anxiety, which isn't just mental. There's very real physiological responses in the body that can be trained. We can actually really put these things in check. And to be honest, most clinicians don't really know what to do with panic attacks. And I just think they get overlooked. I think until you've had them, you don't really respect them. You don't realize how terrifying and how crippling they can be. So, yeah, man, I love it. And people can get breakthrough with panic attacks pretty quickly. They just need the right kind of work. So, anyways, yeah, I guess that's kind of how I morphed into the therapist that I am today.
Very awesome. And I love that it sparked from something in your own life. Like you were saying, a wreck. I had a wreck with a drunk driver, a head-on collision as well. And it took me 3 weeks just to step foot in a vehicle. And the only thing I'd get in is like a big old avalanche truck, So I totally get that. And the panic attacks are something that came with it. And it was something that you feel like you're dying. Like you physically feel like you're dying. And then your brain's telling you are, And so, yeah, it's the breath work and all the stuff that was involved to get through it. It's always an interesting thing.
Oh yeah. I mean, I struggled with a disorder in my teenage years, and I have zero anxiety now. You can ask Brandon. I was pretty bad. But my struggles came from just the most ridiculous thoughts and, those intrusive things that you just can't stop. Like you said, I think that is the biggest thing. Unless you've struggled with these 2 items, people just don't understand it. And they don't try to have that empathy that you would have if you've been through it. But I think one of the best things that I wanted to share based off what you said was someone told me anxiety is excitement trying to get up. So I've always tried to, like my first plane ride, I was like so anxious, so nervous. And I was like, you know what? I should get excited about this. Like, let's go. Like, we're going somewhere cool. We're doing something. And, I turned that anxiety into a positive. And like you said, I faced my fears. And then, just had some healthy channels as well. The breathing, like Brandon said, was huge. Breathing techniques save you from anxiety so well. And the gym, a lot of people don't realize, but getting in the gym, man, it got me off medication and everything. So yeah, but I wanted to share that, neither here nor there. But
that's good, man. Yeah, there's a lot of different, depending on the particular type of anxiety. All those things you mentioned are great. And, you know, like we're pretty black and white as humans. We tend to go like, okay, what's the one reason I have this fear or this anxiety? What's the one reason I have this addiction? It's like a web, bro. There's different slices to the pie here, and we got to tackle this from different angles. You can get freedom, but like anything, man, if you want to get freedom, you got to put in some juice. You got to put in some work and be willing to face your fears, which a lot of people aren't willing to do, you know? So, yeah, so it's fun work. It's exciting. But it's not uncommon with the programs that I run that guys run into panic attacks and fears because I'm really pushing them outside of their comfort zone. And heck, I was just attending a men's training, and one of the evolutions, we had to fight another man in a controlled setting, all out. And, you know, that fight or flight, whether you want it to or not, comes up, man. Right. But I've done so much work. I'm able to work through that and stay focused. And there's a guy I love, you guys, if you don't follow him, his name's Tony Blauer. He's basically a expert martial artist, but he's kind of like he's not a clinician, but he's like a hands-on mental coach, psychologist for the martial arts world. And he always
worked with like a lot of like police and everything too. I think I've seen some of his stuff.
Yeah, he does
It's how to control your fight or flight response, like in very high pressure scenarios like that, so that you can still rely on your training appropriately and things like that.
That's right. His tagline is, if you can manage your fear, you can manage the fight. Because there's the fight component, but then there's the fear component, and the fear can defeat you before you even fight. The fear can defeat you before you give the speech. The fear can defeat you before you ask her hand in marriage. The fear can defeat you before you start a podcast. And so you never actually launch. Right? So we've all got work to do.
Indeed. I wanted to circle back a little bit. You know, you are the primal virtues guy, and we haven't asked you yet, what are the primal virtues according to Jonathan Rios?
Yeah. So, well, I wrote that little, I like to call it the toilet book, because you can read a chapter for every bowel movement and get through that stuff. Get through that stuff in 10 days if you want. But yeah, man, the primal virtues were basically virtues that I'd been living by that I found to be helpful. And I started to teach those to my clients, and they found them to be helpful. And then they would leave my office and they wouldn't really have a ton of support. That's why I started doing the social media thing. And then I printed that book, had that published primarily for my clients. And a couple of I won't list them all, but a couple of the primal virtues are, number one is, I'm a warrior. I refuse to be domesticated, which for me meant, hence the t-shirt, for me means this world really wants you to shut up and fall in line and not be you. The problem is everybody else is already taken. They're already all taken, bro. And so in a world that says they love variety, they say that, but the second you step out of line, they don't love you anymore. Cancel culture, all that stuff. So being a warrior to me is being willing to step into the gap on behalf of others. And in order to do that, you oftentimes have to risk rejection. You oftentimes have to risk not being liked. You have to risk not having the popular vote or the popular opinion. You have to put your neck out there and be bold and brave. So for me, it's a constant reminder to remain undomesticated. I don't want to be civilized. I don't want to be soft. I don't want to be effeminate, right? I want to be me, and I want to be who God made me to be. I want to be a solid protector, provider, a presider. And so this is my personal call to that, right? And If I could get that tattooed on my face, I would, but that'd probably be a bad idea. So that's number one. Maybe another one worth mentioning is I do not despise the day of small things. They prepare me for the big things. And I'm very passionate about stewardship because I believe it is the route to promotion in the natural and in the supernatural. So I think a lot of people, and I used to be like this. They despise their small minimum wage job and they do a crappy job. They show up late. They don't sweep right. They're not willing to do the humble job, and they have a bad attitude, and they wonder why they never get promoted, and they wonder why they just aren't progressing in life. And you know, I remember being a kid watching my dad mow the lawn, and I thought my dad was a perfectionist because he would be out there way too long and just taking his sweet time. And then he would ask me to do it, and then he'd have to come up behind me and show me where I'd made all these mistakes. And it was like I was rushing through it, but my dad is a man of excellence. And it would piss me off. I'm like, Dad, I'm just trying to go hang with my friends. And it's no, you got to go back and do those corners. And it's like, what is this about? It's about excellence. So I don't despise the day of small things. I exhibit excellence in the small things so that I can handle the big things. And if you're not excellent with money now, you're not going to be excellent with money then. Right? If you're not excellent with your integrity now, you won't have integrity in the big things. You'll fold like a little pipsqueak. So that's what I mean by that chapter. One more. This is a big one, man, for me is I do hard things voluntarily, for that is where I grow. And I just primarily wrote that because I saw so many men in particular taking the easy path, seeking pleasure and comfort, not realizing there's no glory in that. There's times for pleasure, there's times for rest, but that is not why you were created. And if you're going to max out potential that God injected inside of you, the only way to do that is through the hard path, which involves testing, which involves trial, which involves adversity. And there's a big difference between me forcing you into adversity and you choosing it voluntarily. I can push you into the deep end, or you can jump off yourself. And those are two massively different things. So you're not going to get over your fears by someone else forcing you to do it. You're going to have to voluntarily grab your cojones and walk in that direction. So yeah, I do hard things voluntarily. That is where I grow. I'm just constantly encouraging men. Hey man, like as a man, you're going to have a hell of a time feeling deep joy and progress if you're taking the easy path. Because every man that I've ever met who was thriving had a deep sense that he was making progress. And every man that I've ever met who was really struggling with depression and meaninglessness and hopelessness and despair typically didn't see themselves making progress. So it's very important that we pursue progress, which means facing our fears, which means choosing the hard path. So those are three to chew on.
Yeah, that last one I wholeheartedly agree with. I actually made a video not too long ago about that exact thing where we live in this super comfortable world. Shoot, even if you're in the military, a lot of times you're really not roughing it that hard, depending on your job. And there's almost this cultural push to never do anything difficult or challenging, and it's killing us. It's just slow death. You're just rotting away slowly. There's something about that adversity sharpens us, it hones us, it makes us more than we are today. And through that, like you said, it makes me grow. I 100%.
This is the warning to your listeners is, your enemy doesn't care about yesterday's victories.
Exactly.
So you may have crushed it yesterday, and you may have crushed it with your business. You may have landed the woman and got married. Whatever it is, you may have gotten promoted. But that's yesterday. That's dead and over, right? And so I have to consistently think about what is the heart like. If you ask yourself, okay, you're trying to figure out the right thing. What's the right thing here? The right thing is usually attached to the hard thing. So how do I go deep with my wife? Well, it's going to be hard. How do I steward the kids that God has given me? It's going to be hard. You're going to have to exert yourself. You're going to have to voluntarily choose the hard path. But guys get married, they get the girl, and they let their foot off the gas. Guys get the job or make the first million, and they let their foot off the gas. Guys become a Christian, and they're disciplined, and then they let their foot off the gas. And it's like, what are you doing, bro? You thought yesterday's victory mattered today? Nah, son. That's dead and over. We got a new battle today.
Yeah, because I mean, otherwise you become like, you know, the joke character from what was that movie, Napoleon Dynamite? You know, Uncle Rico, right? He's just hanging out. Oh man, if Coach would have put me in, it's like if you're always hanging on the one time you did something really good, like you're stuck there. You're not. There's no growth. There's no vision. And like we talked earlier, I think as men, we just have a need inherently to just do something that we feel has purpose, right? We want to 20, 30, 40 years from now look back and say, I did something that mattered. And if you're not you'll never get that.
Sorry about that, George. I cut you off.
No, you're good. Go ahead, man.
I just got off a Zoom call with a client just before we got on this podcast. And she was lamenting that her husband stopped pursuing her. He just basically let his foot off the gas. And she's like, I don't really know how to get him going again. It's like when we stop choosing the hard path, that's the kind of thing that happens. You let your guard down and you get taken out.
Once you learn to quit, it becomes a habit. I mean, that's what it is. It's people have gotten so comfortable with quitting or just being relaxed and being mediocre. They settle and it's habitual, and man, it's tough. And like you said, it's a daily battle. You have to fight it daily until you've rooted that out completely.
There's a wisdom. There's wisdom to be had. Like there's a time for rest. There's a time for the lion to go to sleep and the lamb to rise, right? There's a time for all things under the sun. But generally speaking, you live on a fractured planet. This is a world at war, unseen and in the scene. And if you don't think that and know that, you're going to be a casualty. Casual bros are casualties. Casual husbands, casual fathers, they're all casualties. And they've got an excuse for it, but they're freaking casualties. And we don't need to be that.
And then their families become collateral damage.
100%. That doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah, there was a saying, Steve Prefontaine used to say, it was to accept anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift. And a lot of people, they're daily sacrificing a lot of things on the altar, and not just their gifts, but their relationships, like you said. It's a pretty sad state, and it just takes a little bit of attention and intentionality on a daily basis. And a lot of people just aren't willing to do that because they'd rather their brains seek comfort. And it's hard for them to get out of that rut, but it's like, man, you got to, or you're going to lose what you have. You're going to sacrifice it. So,
yeah. And they're willing to sacrifice their purpose on the altar. I mean, purpose creates legacy. Men talk about wanting to leave legacies. Look at every single man with a real purpose who has lived their life by it, and I can guarantee you they have a massive legacy. It's because people remember the ones who, like you said, all the attributes of the man, those are the guys that go after stuff. And I think, to reiterate on what you said, every day's a battle. Like you can't just, oh, okay, well, we won yesterday's battle. Well, you didn't win the war. The war's ongoing and it's never going to stop. And I think that's something that hit home for me. Like, we're all guilty of a little procrastination, or we're guilty of sitting a little idle unless we really focus and push ourselves. And I like what you said, man. That really struck home with me for sure.
You know, Nietzsche said, he said something to the effect of society tames the wolf into a dog and man is the most domesticated animal of all. Right. And we think the average guy thinks he's undomesticated and wild and that he's this warrior. And yet to be a warrior, to be undomesticated is a calculated, trained disposition. The warrior trains every freaking day. The samurai gets up before dawn and takes a cold bath in the river and then anoints himself with oil and sharpens his sword, and he gets his mind right before he even starts the day. And it's like, that's the warrior mentality. You don't have to have fought in Afghanistan. The warrior starts when you're willing to step into the gap because you are willing to face your fears. You're willing to stay that untamed wolf, so to speak. And I just think, man, like it's 2023. We are so obsessed with talking about change and talking about masculinity and talking about marriage and talking about fatherhood. It's like, shut up and do it. Let's be the guy. Be the guy. And then talk about it while you're doing it. But like, dude, I'm so sick of hype. I'm so convicted that God is not impressed with talk. Talk is cheap. God is scanning for the earth, looking for those who are fully committed to him, that he would strengthen them because they're doing something. They're not just talking, right? So that's my rant. But I'm talking to myself, man. Like, am I just a talker, bro? Am I just a guy that did some good stuff 5 years ago? Am I just a guy that writes on social media and I have a gift for writing, but I actually don't, my family, my wife can't stand me and my kids don't want to be around me and my colleagues don't want to work with me. It's like, we need a gut check, man, because there's a lot of fake going on and it's easy to deceive people on social media. But I always, in my programs, I'm always challenging the guys. I'm like, I do not believe you can know a man until you see him in adversity.
Yep, I'd agree. It's really easy. It's really easy to have an act until things get really, really tough.
Yeah.
And nobody's perfect.
Yep.
You know, so I get that, but it's like,
that's also why like brotherhood and tribe is so important, because if you have that bond and that connection, you love that other person enough to say the hard thing that's going to make them upset in the moment, but in the long term gives them the opportunity to realize where they're failing or where they're willfully doing the wrong thing. And if you haven't built that up around you, then I mean, yeah, life is tough already, and to try and do it alone is essentially guaranteeing you're going to fail. Because no one can be successful, whether it's individually, as a father, as a husband, in your business, in a sport, whatever, by yourself. It absolutely requires, like you said earlier, mentors mentored you and your father. Yeah. So that isolation is just guaranteeing failure.
You nailed it.
On top of that too, with fear, you mentioned, I love to say that, you have to make a necessary movement. Imperfect action is better than no action. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling a little convicted or something, you're like, oh man, but I just don't know how I'm going to do it right. Well, just try. If you try and fail and try and try and try, eventually you're going to get it right. And that's still better than just sitting there waiting to drop a perfect plan, because guess what? Conditions are ever changing and that plan won't be perfect the second you start trying it anyway. So
Absolutely.
I'll get off my high horse now.
No, yeah, that's me, because like I was the same way. Like anything I would approach, if it wasn't in a perfect, like I always seek perfectionism and research before I went into something because of the fear of failure driving behind it. And for so many guys, it's like, don't let fear take the wheel. You have to just understand that you're not going to be perfect and that you're going to make mistakes. And those mistakes are what are going to give you a closer view of increasing the skill or perfection, I guess you could say. So
going back, that's good. That's good, Brandon. Going back to I'm aware I refuse to be domesticated. Something that we just have to accept, guys, is, I don't know if you've ever thought of it this way, but no matter what you do in this life, you're going to be judged for it. If you start a podcast, you're going to be judged for your opinions. If you don't start a podcast, maybe you're judged as being maybe a silent nobody. If you're vocal about your political views, you're going to be judged for being a bigot or whatever. If you're not vocal, you're going to be judged for being the silent mass that doesn't ever give a rip about anything. If it's just, no matter what you do, man, if you get ripped and jacked and people see you, they're going to judge you for, maybe you're on TRT. And if you're fat and or whatever, they're just going to get judged, man. You're just going to get judged. So it's like, you might as well live life on your own terms. If I'm going to be judged, at least I'm going to be judged for what I believe in and what I believe is true. And, you know, it's like, at some point, bro, I just kind of came to the realization God doesn't really care that much about my reputation. I do. I love that thing. I'm like, oh, bro, I need people to like me. But God's like, hey, man, that ego, pride thing, that actually will cause you to implode. And when you begin to fear God and revere God's opinion, it puts the opinions of men in its rightful place. So when we say things like the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, or in Deuteronomy it says, let the Lord alone be your fear, let him be your dread. That means he's supposed to be the guy that I revere. And his opinion is numero uno. And everybody else's is inferior. And if I keep my eyes there, I can deal with the rejection of men, right? I can deal with the betrayals. I'm not saying it's fun. I'm not saying it's easy, but look, every story that you really like in the scriptures, if you look at their stories closely, they were openly willing to face human rejection, even at cost to their lives. And yet we get into the fetal position when somebody makes a negative comment on our social media post. It's like, bro, what are we doing, man? We're addicted to the fear of man. And we have to actively attack that.
Yep. And when you live that way that you're describing, where you just shed yourself of the cares of what others think, and you commit yourself to purpose, the calling on your life, and you start attacking towards that, it is liberating. I mean, life gets easier in a way because you just stop taking on all these extra, things to throw in your backpack because you just don't care anymore. And in you, there's a simplicity and it's beautiful because you just only work towards your mission and you lead your family through it and you lead your business through it, whatever it is, right? But when you have that conviction towards something, you really liberate yourself of a lot of this like stress and anxiety and things like that, because it can't get you, you know. People may still say the same things or whatever, but you don't care anymore. You've made yourself something that can't be brought down by their displeasure, and you have a higher calling, a higher mission to achieve. So why would you let something like that dissuade you?
Here's something a lot of you guys who are either business owners or entrepreneurs or thinking about, your listeners might be thinking about it. I didn't realize how much it was entrenched in the fears of rejection until I became a business owner. And until I started making content on social media, I didn't realize I cared so much about what other people thought. So sometimes it's not until you step into new territory where, you guys launched a podcast. I'm sure you had to contemplate, hey, people might actively hate our content. People might actively think we're idiots. It's like you kind of had to just face that and go, well, you know what? Screw it. We're going to do it anyways. And you put your neck out there. And the more that you step out and take the hits, the stronger you get. You get stronger. You get more developed, right? And there's going to come a time again where somebody critiques me or somebody says something and it's going to hurt. It's not like I'm impervious to it. what I am is like, I'm learning more and more. Okay, man, like if I'm going to really live this life, I have to push the envelope. I have to follow God. And God isn't all that concerned with my reputation.
Mm-hmm. And something that he pushes us to do is before we even accept him as Lord and Savior, is we have to count the cost. Yeah. And so when we count the cost, and with affirmation and belief that we're going to go after and strive towards him, it's an acceptance. Like, okay, regardless of what happens, I'm accepting this, and it's not fear driving, it's not anything else, it's an acceptance. And even if that acceptance is there, it's like he told us we're going to face hatred and we're going to face animosity in his name, and that, you know, we have to sacrifice our life on his altar, sometimes physically, but metaphorically in most cases. And so that acceptance in anything you do in your life is so crucial, because if you're not, like, the acceptance is what helps you when you fail and you have something that just destroys you, but you're accepting of it. It's like, okay, the yoke is light, because, okay, I put myself here and I told myself, regardless of what was going to happen, I knew this could be an outcome. And you still push through it and you still strive towards what you're going for, because there's the only time it ends and you fail is when you quit or you give up. Right. And so for me, that acceptance is so much better, and it's so unburdening for me. So, but yeah, counting the cost is huge.
Well, it also comes back to another thing. I like the analogy about the wolf versus the domesticated dog. Our listeners need to decide. You know, the one thing about a wolf pack, the pups learn from the adults. Just by, actually, most of their communication is done by eye positioning and contact. And that brings up a great point. Like, if you're wanting to teach young men or young women the kind of men they need around them, you have to lead by that example. And wolves are a great example of that. So I love the analogy that you said that, because, I mean, they also have to travel in a pack. Everybody in the pack has a job. And who you surround yourself with changes who you are. I mean, if you surround yourself with losers, that's what you're going to get. You need to teach your kids that. You can't have your kids accepting mediocrity. And while you're preaching, like you said, speaking, you can talk all you want. But if your kid's failing, what good does all that talk do? You know what I mean? You got to push them.
Justin, talk, you just kind of broached the topic of parenting and fathering and kind of leading in that sense. And, you know, one thing I think a lot of moderns don't understand about love, they tend to think love is hot emotion. 1 Corinthians says love always protects. Okay? If you love someone or something, you protect it. If you love your kids, you protect them from horrific ideologies, from evil people, right? You protect them from invaders. If you love, you know, you're supposed to love God and love your neighbor, right? If you love your neighbor as you love yourself, what does it mean to love yourself? You protect yourself, right? So in order to protect my wife, I have to be capable of protecting, right? And so when we talk about the 3 Ps, protector, provider, presider, it's like, what is it? Well, we need to be working on our protective skills, not just physical, right? That's good. That's important. I do that. But protecting our children from filth on TV, from neighbors that, like, we're very careful about who our kids sleep over with. Like, they barely sleep over with anybody. There's so much perversion. It's like, I know so many fathers that are so passive in that area, and kids are getting taken out, right? And here's the other one. You protect your family from yourself. Sometimes the enemy's not out there. It's my own selfishness. It's my own unbridled aggression. It's my own mouth, the words I speak to my wife and my kids. We're all training boxing to protect from some home break-in, and yet you're mouthing off to your wife and disrespecting her in front of your kids. It's like, they need protection from you, bro. Right? Have you learned self-control? That's a big one, man. So love always protects. If you love someone, You speak the truth. If you love someone, you protect them. Man, I've had to protect people from themselves. So yeah, I think we have we really struggle to understand what love is. Okay, for different reasons, and I think that's one of the things we could do as fathers is demonstrate this is what love looks like, right? It's not all hot emotion. It can include emotion, and often does, but just because you don't feel it, like you may wake up tomorrow and be gassy and be moody and not feel like feeding your children, but you do it anyways because you're the provider, you're the protector. It has nothing to do with your fluctuating emotions and mood. Right. Just like loving your wife. Sometimes you wake up and you're exhausted and you want to be left alone and she needs you. Right? Are you going to be selfish or are you going to step into the fray regardless of are you almost going to reject the inflamed emotion in favor of what is right and true? And modern culture does not agree with that concept. In fact, I would say has almost gone in the opposite direction.
Well, and as fathers, it's leadership, not likership, right? So there's a lot of times where you're going to have to say no, whether it's protection or it's to instruct, or there's a lot of times where you have to be the bad guy in a sense. Don't. It's the spirit of the thing. So don't listen to this and twist it into something it's not. But there are times where you know that this is the best thing for my child. For example, you're not going to eat ice cream all day long, right? Let's use a simple one. That's why you say no. It's not because you hate your kid. It's because you know that in order for them to be healthy, they have to have actual food. That's a very simplistic version, but I think a lot of people err on that where, to your point earlier, we love other people liking us and we're addicted to it, even within our own families. And being a real leader means at times that you're going to have to hold a hard line on certain things. And in the moment, they won't like you, whether that's your spouse or your kids. But if you really love them, you will hold true to those virtues, the primal virtues, or the objective that you believe in. And that's with compassion. It's with understanding. It's not being a tyrant. It's not being a brute. But that's absolutely, I think, a lost art that I think ties into what we talked earlier, where men just start, prolonged adolescence. But Brandon, I think you had something.
Yeah, no, because there's different types of loves in the Bible, particularly in the New Testament. If you look at the original Greek language, you're mentioning a very emotion-driven love. That's eros, right? That's an eros type of love. And then the parenting love is storge. And then you've got your agape, which is like your God love. Like it's an unconditional love that's specifically from God because it's perfect and it's unconditional and sacrificial. And He calls us as the head of the household and the leader of the home to exemplify that same kind of agape love to our family and to our children, but also the storge love, which also signifies like natural affection. And so like if you really jump into these different types of loves that the Bible specifically hones in on in the Greek, it's amazing because like I didn't understand the different type of love that I could express properly and model properly and to my kids until I studied these things. So I would recommend looking those four up. It's agape, philia, storge, and eros. But yeah, it's so awesome that you brought up eros naturally. I think that's a very cool thing. So sorry, I had to nerd out a little.
I'm a big fan of eros.
That's right. Yeah, if people don't get that, then man,
you study, you'll see.
Yeah, go look it up. Jonathan, I want to lighten it up a little bit, and well, hopefully lighten it up. What's your favorite part about being a dad?
Favorite part about being a dad, man, I think taking my kids on adventures, watching them watching them overcome their little fears and stepping into their talents, man, and watching them develop. But sometimes it's really just the simple things like sitting on the couch and playing. What were we playing last night? What's the Guess Who? You guys ever play Guess Who? playing guess who with my 8-year-old, and she's like freaking out. You know, it's just the little things, man. So just being around them and their innocence, man. That's the thing I want to protect. That's becoming a father, like, really woke up the protector in me, because I recognize this is valuable. This needs to be protected, you know? So yeah, I'd say those are a couple.
Nice. If you could give one piece of advice to dads out there, what would it be?
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, I think it's somewhat simple. Your kid doesn't need a best friend; they need a father. And you can be friendly, right? You can have that friendship dynamic, but they need someone to lead from the front. They need someone to have a gracious but firm hand. They need someone to bring healthy discipline into their lives and to help guide them through life. And you have to be willing to risk your kid getting upset with you in order to father them. To tell your kid no when they need to hear no, rather than telling them yes because you want to be their friend and you want them to like you. It's like the job of a father isn't primarily to be liked. Although they're going to like you as you love them and father them. Your job is to lead them, to protect them, to guide them, to love them and discipline them so that they become mature adults who can thrive in this life. I know I've had way too many clients in the office where dad just wanted to be buddies and no discipline, just high five, love you, buddy. And the kid and the family's a disaster, absolute disaster. So hopefully that makes sense.
Makes complete sense. I agree with everything you just said. All right. Well, Jonathan, I wanted to give a couple minutes to you to let you tell people where they can find you, find your services. I know you've got your website. Is that probably the best place for people to land first, or is it Instagram?
Yeah, either or. Instagram is Primal Virtues. My website, maybe when you guys post it, the spelling's kind of funny, but it's thrive.co, THRIIV.co, thrive.co. So, yeah, there it is. And if you really want to find me, I live in Jupiter, Florida, but I'm not going to give you my address. You just have to track me down.
Yeah. Can you also tell us about so this is your course, right? The Primal Men course?
Yes. So I've got the Primal course, which is the 3-day mountain course in North Carolina. And I love facilitating that. And guys who come in leave as brothers. Some of them come in as strangers and they leave like a band of brothers. That's 3 3/10 days. Then I've got the rite of passage, which is 8 weeks in total. And that takes place for 7 weeks virtual. And then the 8th week, everybody comes into Jupiter, Florida, as we facilitate the Crucible experience.
Awesome. We'll maybe have to do that.
Come on.
We talked about rucking in the mountains, so this is right up the alley.
Well, I was joking with the guys, so I'm former active Army and in the Guard now, and they're a bunch of civilians. So I was joking about how we're gonna have to go get a cabin somewhere out in a mountain, area, and I'll rough them up a little bit, put a ruck on their back, and make them do a bunch of stuff, and they can teach me some things I haven't learned. But yeah, it's funny how stupid stuff like that is like, men just love that. We eat it up, and to deny that, you're just doing yourself a disservice. So.
And you got to watch George too, because he'll say, "Oh, I'm a terrible runner," and then you're actually a good runner, and he's 2.5 miles ahead of you and on his way back in 100-degree heat in Mississippi. Yeah, like that hasn't happened to me. Yeah.
All right, Jonathan. Any closing thoughts you want to leave us with?
Man, for you guys, just appreciate what you're doing. And I would just ask you to consider moving forward, like, what does it look like for you guys as podcasters to be bold and to keep pushing into the frontier and I know you're getting so much good content and I know you guys are applying that, but what does it look like for you guys to push the envelope? I know life happens and So just be thinking about that, man. That's it.
Well, I don't want to. We can't reveal anything yet, but we're making moves to put things into action too. We're not just going to talk about it, but yeah, it's amazing. We just, to all the listeners out there, all of your support has been amazing. We really appreciate it, and we're just excited for what the future brings, because it's been way more than we thought it was going to be. So we're gonna double down on it and put everything we got into it. So, Jonathan, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us just straight from the heart, and love what you're doing. Like I said, we'll have to actually maybe look into the four of us, the present fathers, doing your 3-day adventure. That might be a pretty good little growth team bonding experience for us. So
let's do it.
Hopefully.
We're doing it. We got to do it now. You can't stop about it. We got to put the action down.
Keep tabs with me, and we'll make it work.
Look, I'm just excited to be on the toilet reading your book. I mean, see if I can knock out a chapter.
It's not creepy at all.
No,
Right, so that one's noted.
I'm a bookworm, so I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're going to get you out in the mountains and rough you up a little bit. You'll be a little bit less of
He needs it.
a little bit more of a warrior. But books are great. Brandon I've read a lot of books now after being your friend, and I'm definitely a lot better because of it. So on that note, enough talk, dads. Let's start climbing the mountain. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Present Fathers Podcast. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Spotify to catch all of our amazing episodes. We will see you in the next one.